In a decision that will echo through the halls of American history, the U.S. Supreme Court has delivered a powerful verdict, striking down the tariffs imposed during the Trump administration. This ruling is not just a legal technicality, it marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential power and the future of American trade policy. The justices ruled that these tariffs represented an unconstitutional overreach of executive authority, setting a precedent that will shape how future presidents approach trade and economic policy. The decision sends a clear message. Even in matters of foreign affairs and economic strategy, the president must operate within the boundaries set by the Constitution. By invalidating billions of dollars in tariffs, the court has fundamentally altered the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress. No longer can the president act unilaterally to impose sweeping taxes on imports. Instead, Congress's constitutional authority over trade is reaffirmed. This shift could have far-reaching consequences for how the U.S. negotiates with its global trading partners and manages its economic interests. The ruling effectively dismantles the legal framework established under President Trump, forcing lawmakers, policymakers, and business leaders to reevaluate the entire approach to U.S. trade policy. It opens the door for new debates and legislative action as the country seeks a more balanced and constitutionally sound path forward. For importers, this decision is a game changer. Many are now poised to seek refunds for tariffs they were previously required to pay, potentially amounting to billions of dollars. This could create significant fiscal challenges for the government as agencies scramble to process claims and adjust budgets to account for the sudden reversal of revenue streams. Beyond the immediate financial implications, the Supreme Court's decision has sparked a critical national conversation about the limits of presidential authority and the essential role of Congress in shaping economic policy. Lawmakers from both parties are now debating how best to assert congressional oversight and ensure that future trade decisions reflect the will of the people, not just the priorities of the executive branch. In delivering the opinion of the court, Chief Justice Roberts emphasized that while the president does have significant powers in foreign affairs, those powers are not absolute. The Constitution, he noted, was designed to prevent any one branch of government from wielding unchecked authority, especially when it comes to matters that affect the nation's economy and its relationships with the world. With this landmark decision, the Supreme Court has effectively redrawn the map of American trade policy. The saga that began with tariffs affecting billions in goods has now concluded with a reaffirmation of constitutional checks and balances, setting the stage for a new era in U.S. economic strategy. Ultimately, the Supreme Court has answered a fundamental question for our democracy. The president cannot unilaterally impose such far-reaching taxes on imports. This ruling not only reshapes American trade, but also reinforces the enduring principle that no leader is above the law, and that the Constitution remains the ultimate safeguard of our nation's economic future. The journey to this landmark Supreme Court decision began far from the marble halls of Washington, in the lower courts scattered across the country. It started with a series of lawsuits filed by businesses, trade groups, and individuals who believed that recent tariffs were not only harmful to their livelihoods, but also exceeded the legal authority granted to the executive branch. In these initial hearings, the plaintiffs challenged the tariffs, arguing that they were imposed without proper congressional approval and that the economic consequences were devastating for many industries. Lawyers presented evidence of shuttered businesses, lost jobs, and declining profits, painting a vivid picture of the real-world impact. The plaintiffs contended that the administration's use of emergency powers to levy tariffs was an overreach, bypassing the checks and balances intended by the Constitution. They claimed the tariffs led to widespread economic harm, from small family businesses to large manufacturers, and that such sweeping actions required clear legislative backing. After careful consideration, a federal trial court sided with the plaintiffs. The judge ruled that the administration had indeed overstepped its authority, setting the stage for a major legal confrontation that would soon capture national attention. The government quickly appealed, but the appellate court upheld the lower court's decision. The panel of judges found that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, was never meant to justify long-term tariff regimes. Instead, it was designed for short-term emergencies, not as a tool for broad economic policy. Facing mounting pressure, the administration took the case to the Supreme Court. Officials warned that overturning the tariffs could trigger economic chaos, disrupt global supply chains, and undermine the government's ability to respond to future crises. After months of deliberation, the Supreme Court issued its decision. The justices affirmed the lower court's rulings, making it clear that presidential emergency powers are not a blank check for sweeping economic measures. The court emphasized the importance of congressional oversight and the separation of powers. In its opinion, the court concluded that imposing broad, long-term tariffs fell outside the scope of what Congress had authorized under the IEEPA. The decision reinforced the principle that significant economic actions require clear legislative approval, not just executive discretion. This historic judgment brings an end to years of legal uncertainty, providing clarity for businesses and policymakers alike. However, it also opens a new chapter of economic adjustment, as industries and government officials now navigate the implications of the court's ruling and seek new ways to address future challenges. The Trump administration defended tariffs as a lawful exercise of executive authority, citing national security. They warned of economic consequences if tariffs were struck down, arguing refunds could destabilize the U.S. Treasury. The administration claimed tariffs were vital for international negotiations. Legally, they argued the IEEPA allowed the president to impose tariffs. The Supreme Court found this interpretation untenable, emphasizing Congress's specific statutes for adjusting tariffs. The court saw the use of IEEPA as an attempt to bypass congressional constraints. The administration's defense failed to persuade the court's majority. A coalition of businesses and states challenged the Trump tariffs, arguing they were a crippling tax. They contended the president usurped Congress's power to regulate commerce. States highlighted the tariffs' damage to local economies, elevating the dispute to a federalism issue. The Supreme Court's decision validated their argument, affirming Congress's authority to set tariffs. The ruling offers potential financial relief through tariff refunds. It reaffirms that major economic policy should be made through the democratic process. At the heart of the case was the interpretation of the IEEPA. The Trump administration argued for an expansive reading, justifying tariffs as a regulatory measure. Challengers presented a narrower interpretation, which the Supreme Court adopted. The court distinguished between regulating transactions and imposing taxes, emphasizing Congress's power to tax. The court concluded that allowing the president to levy import taxes would be a vast delegation of legislative power. By rejecting the broad interpretation, the court reinforced the separation of powers in economic policy. The major questions doctrine was key in the Supreme Court's decision. The court determined that imposing tariffs was a major question requiring clear congressional authorization. The majority opinion stated that using the IEEPA for sweeping tariff policy was an executive overreach. The administration argued the doctrine didn't apply, citing executive authority in foreign policy. The court rejected this, emphasizing the president's power is not unlimited. The ruling reinforces Congress's role as the primary policy-making body. The ruling obligates the U.S. government to refund billions in tariffs, presenting fiscal challenges. Businesses that paid duties may receive financial relief, aiding investment and hiring. The refund process will be complex, and the economic landscape has changed since tariffs were imposed. The decision introduces uncertainty into U.S. trade policy, requiring a reassessment of strategies. Analysts predict the ruling could weaken the U.S. bargaining position. The ruling places the responsibility on Congress to legislate on trade. This could lead to a more stable trade policy framework if consensus is reached. The decision dismantles one policy, but creates a policy vacuum lawmakers must fill. The Supreme Court's landmark ruling marks a pivotal moment in American governance, fundamentally redefining the scope and limits of presidential power as we know it. For decades, the boundaries of executive authority have been tested and stretched, but this decision draws a clear line, signaling a new era of checks and balances. By firmly rebuking the unchecked expansion of executive authority, the court sends a message that no single branch can dominate the others, especially when it comes to matters that impact the nation's economy and global standing. The ruling reaffirms the constitutional separation of powers, a foundational principle designed to prevent the concentration of power and to protect democratic governance. It reminds us that the Constitution is not just a historical document, but a living framework that guides our leaders' actions. Congress's primacy in commercial regulation is now unmistakable, restoring its central role in shaping the nation's economic policies and ensuring that major decisions reflect the will of the people through their elected representatives. From now on, presidents are explicitly barred from using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, as a tool for trade policy without first obtaining clear congressional approval. This curtails the executive's ability to act unilaterally on critical economic issues. As a result, the executive branch must now shift its strategy, moving away from go-it-alone tactics and toward genuine collaboration with Congress. This new reality demands negotiation, compromise, and coalition building to achieve policy goals. The decision reshuffles the political dynamics in Washington, forcing both the White House and Congress to rethink their approaches to power and influence. Political strategy will now hinge on building consensus rather than relying on executive orders. Congress is empowered to take a more active, hands-on role in shaping the nation's future, stepping up as a co-equal branch and reclaiming its constitutional responsibilities. However, this shift also raises the risk of partisan gridlock, as deep divisions within Congress could stall important decisions and delay responses to urgent challenges. In a rapidly changing global economy, such delays could potentially disadvantage the United States in international trade negotiations, making it harder to respond swiftly to global events and competition. Ultimately, the ruling challenges the long-standing notion of vesting ever greater power in the presidency, reminding the nation that true strength lies in balanced governance. It champions the ideals of shared power and legislative deliberation, encouraging lawmakers to work together, debate openly, and find common ground for the good of the country. In the end, this decision is framed as a robust defense of the rule of law, ensuring that America's democracy remains resilient, accountable, and true to its founding principles. The Supreme Court's decision is a watershed moment, reasserting Congress's authority over trade. It limits presidential emergency powers and sets a precedent constraining future presidents. The ruling forces a return to the legislative process for major trade initiatives. Supporters hail it as a victory for the rule of law, while critics worry it weakens the presidency. The decision closes one chapter in trade history, but opens another with pressing questions. The core challenge of responding to a changing global economic order remains. The nation must adjust to this new legal reality, questioning if it will lead to a more collaborative trading system.